They say you can't analyze comedy. Let's talk about Scary Movie.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're going to be doing Have You Seen? For those who are not familiar with this series, Daniel, may you please explain to the people what the hell it is?
So, Have You Seen is our series in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This one is a little bit different insofar as that we had all seen this before, but not in a long time. So I saw this when it first came out. I was 14 when it first came out, and I had not seen it probably for well over a decade. How about you guys? How familiar had you been with Scary Movie?
I remember watching it kind of in and around the time of the 2000s. Maybe not exactly when it came out, but maybe caught it on like DVD or something. It's just one of those movies where I also haven't seen it in quite a while, just mainly because it's not one that you can like easily just kind of like put on and enjoy. And I feel like the further you kind of move away from when it was released, the more difficult it is to put on. And I'm sure we'll kind of get into sort of like how things age, some of the jokes in this as well. But yeah, for me, it's just one of those ones where it's been a very long time, but it did give me a lot of nostalgic feels when watching it.
For me, because this film came out in 2000, so I would have been 3 years old when it came out. So clearly, I didn't see it when it first came out. However, I saw it years, I don't know what year, I don't know how old I was, but I remember I saw it on, those pirate DVD copies that they used to sell outside the Sainsbury's and the shops. Yeah, I saw it on that for the first time. And yeah, that was a long time ago. The first time I remember watching it, I remember I had a good time. And of course, I had to kind of like look at my door to make sure my parents weren't there. You know what I'm saying? Because this is definitely one of them ones where you could get in trouble if you get caught watching it. But yeah, so this time around watching it, I can't lie, I would have loved to be there when it first dropped in cinema. This was actually the first spoof I've ever seen where it actually got me into others. Like the other ones I've seen is like Epic Movie, and I really liked Epic Movie when that came out. I actually watched that one in cinema, I remember. But yeah, so I had a fun time with this. Of course, I had some problems, but all in all, I had like a fun time.
This is definitely one of those movies that's very much of its time, right? It came out in 2000, I think, and it's pretty typical of the humor of that time. And I'm sure we'll get to that, what that looks like 25 years later. But the reason that I thought this would be interesting is that, like, over the past couple of months, we saw a couple of classic horror movies, specifically Halloween, and then we saw the Scream franchise, which was satirizing those movies, and now we're watching Scary Movie, which parodies mostly Scream, but also I Know What You Did Last Summer, which we haven't seen yet. And it's a movie that is pretty much entirely based on pointing out references to things that people know. And I think the other movies in the series get even more blatant about this, where like I think the second one parodies like a Nike commercial or something that came out at that time, and it counts on you recognizing stuff, right? So my question here would be, and I think this was the first time that I've seen Scary Movie after I've seen this entire chain of movies that comes before it. So Halloween, Friday the 13th, stuff like that, like these classic horror movies, which then get satirized in Scream, and this now parodies mostly Scream, but others too. So I kind of mentally made a list when I watched this, where I said, okay, about half the jokes are about movies we've talked about in the last couple of months, and half of these movies are movies that we have are referencing movies that we haven't talked about, and that I'm pretty sure you guys haven't seen, right? So I Know What You Did Last Summer, for example. Have you guys seen that one?
I definitely watched it though, but I don't remember what the hell happened.
So that's a solid half of this movie, right? Like the plot itself is about 50% Scream and 50% I Know What You Did Last Summer. And then the jokes are like a big grab bag from different movies, some very obvious and some more obscure. So my question would be, how does that come across when you kind of know half the things they reference?
I like that they weren't so strict with the source material, because even though you know what was going to happen, they didn't literally follow it as a guideline. Like you did, like there were certain scenes that they took out, and there was certain, of course, each major moment in a specific scene that you see in Scream, that's when they spoofed it. And they kind of like mixed it around a bit, which was I like seeing it. And also they kind of like utilized on exploiting like different personalities and cultural stereotypes. So that made it more engaging to watch. So I didn't have an issue with knowing what was gonna happen. You know what I'm saying? I liked the little spice and the little mix that they added to each of it. Of course, you know what I'm saying? Of course, the mix and the spice that they added to it was OD over sexualized, like I said, which I had the issue with. But besides that, the mix that they added to it worked for me. I liked it.
For me, it helped get through the movie because there were points, obviously, we're, more familiar with Scream. So there were points where it was doing sort of kind of like heavy reenactment of what Scream was, especially some of the scene towards the end where, the two sort of like kind of like Scream people are confronting sort of Anna in this movie, and then they're like doing the whole like you stabbed me and this, that, and the other. Because I've already seen it before, it kind of just like felt too played out. So in this movie where there was like not large parts of it, but there was like a lot of the parts which didn't feel too familiar, just kind of like helped me get through the movie because it was like it's not like a one big reenactment of of a particular movie that I'd already seen. It was like, okay, I can like at least have like some fresh things in this where it's not just like a complete play by play of sort of what I've seen before.
The reason I ask is that I've seen like spoofs of things where I realized they were clearly spoofing something, but something I hadn't seen. And it's a really weird sensation when you kind of look at this and say, I'm sure this is hilarious and I wish I got it. And like in a movie like this, it is all reference and all spoof. Is that like a sensation you had? For instance, there are multiple scenes that are basically spoof and What You Did Last Summer, right? Like the beauty pageant scene where the killer sneaks up to the boyfriend who is at the back of the room, and the girlfriend is supposed to do her performance. And so when she tries to warn the entire room about the killer, they think it's the performance. That is direct from I Know What You Did Last Summer, for example.
I can sort of understand the reference, but that was just a funny scene on its own without needing the knowledge to sort of have watched I Know What You Did Last Summer. Of course, there was like heavy references to it, especially like when they were getting the notes from the killer about what happened. But I don't feel like it was, for me anyways, super necessary in terms of sort of kind of like getting all of the jokes or understanding all of the jokes, or it like needing that reference for sort of what they did to land. And I feel like that's probably a positive of the movie because, when you're referencing so many different things or like so many different sort of horror movies, not everyone might have sort of seen all of them. So it's like, okay, you feel comfortable in, what you know, and you feel comfortable in sort of the spoof of sort of what you've seen. And at the same time, you can kind of like enjoy and sort of kind of like explore other movies or other, things that they're spoofing that you maybe aren't sort of 100% familiar with, and maybe sort of even sort of pique your interest to sort of go and sort of check that out.
So the reason I ask is because I did not get the reference to the final scene, right, where Doofy gets away and it's shown that his entire mannerisms were an act and he just walks away, and that's a reference to The Usual Suspects. And then I watched that scene again to remind myself, and yeah, it's a direct spoof, but I felt like that scene had very little impact because I didn't get the reference. So it's kind of like this thing where like this movie kind of really relies on you having seen all the things it references, right? At least for me, it had that impact where if it's like it's not funny or it's not effective enough on its own, where if you don't get the reference, it still holds up, I don't think.
I hadn't seen The Usual Suspects, and that scene with sort of Dewey at the end where he completely changed was like, I took it like, oh, like, everyone's underestimated this guy. He's kind of flown under the radar just because of kind of like how he is and like how he's treating stuff like that. And I get there's probably more context behind knowing The Usual Suspects, but for me it was just like, oh, this is like an interesting and probably like more accurate way that the killer was sort of kind of fly under the radar, as opposed to the whole, it being sort of the girl's boyfriend, or like, it being sort of like that person that's like a bit of a chad or a bit of a bully that's sort of kind of like in everyone's faces.
Yeah, I think it's like I'm not there for the story, right? I'm there for the spoofs and I'm there for the jokes. Some of the jokes work on their own, right? Mm-hmm. Like when what's his name, Shorty gets shot and smoke comes out of his lung.
Yeah,
like that's just funny on its own. I don't know that references anything, but then there's other things there, like it's like a Silence of the Lambs reference where a Ghostface just starts talking like Hannibal Lecter for a minute. And I know that's funny if you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs.
What was the scene again, sorry?
So that's when he called Cindy at one point. He just randomly starts talking like Hannibal Lecter for a minute.
Was he in the house?
I believe so, yeah. Like it's there's not much, like it doesn't have any relevance otherwise. It's just, hey, you've seen Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yeah.
So that's basically like one of the questions I had while watching this was like, does this actually work? Like the further removed you are from the time it was made, just because those references might not be fresh in your head. There's like dozens of these, right? Like it's not just that one. It's pretty much everything in this movie.
So is your main argument, Daniel, is if you don't get the references, it just doesn't hit, as in like the jokes just don't hit?
It seems like there's different ways of making this work, right? Like Scream works even if you haven't seen any slasher movies. And the more you've seen, the better it works. I think when we talked about Scream, I think we talked about how the genius of this is that Scream is a good slasher movie just to start with. And then the more you know about the genre, the more you'll recognize and the more you get it, right? And there's like this sliding scale of every time you watch it, as you maybe know more about movies or whatever, you start seeing additional references. But it just works as a slasher movie. Whereas something like Airplane, I don't think requires you to, there's just an outright spoof movie. There's just gags for 90 minutes. That doesn't really require you to have seen anything. But if you get the specific references, it's maybe more like it gains humor, but it's just funny on its own, right? And then you've got like the later scary movie sequels. They kind of abandon this like plot structure where it reenacts a movie, like at least for the most part. Some of the sequels are stronger about this and some are looser about this. But a lot of them just start to become a sequence of references, right? Where if like they're basically just chains of references, and if you don't get the reference, then there's nothing there. And it feels like Scary Movies kind of has got one foot in each world, where on the one hand we have a pretty coherent plot, where it basically meshes together a Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, but the story makes enough sense that you can at least follow what's happening if you've not seen those movies. And then we layer jokes on top where you kind of have to have seen it. It's kind of this weird hybrid, I think. At least that's kind of how it came across to me. So on the one, it's like it's not. I don't think it's good enough to stand on its own, like especially not as a horror movie. But it's also too focused on specific things that you need to have seen, because they're not just jokes on their own in a vacuum.
I understand what you're saying, because I don't think if this was shown to an audience that hasn't seen both movies, I actually don't think. Well, I don't know what times were like back in the day, because I don't know what times were like back in the day. But let's say, for example, now let's say you was to show this movie to the audience now, and they haven't seen Scream and they haven't seen What You Did Last Summer. I don't think they would have thought that this film is like funny. Of course, some scenes are funny. They do stand on its own, but I don't think they would have enjoyed the film as much as we did, because as much as someone who does understand the referencing. That's purely because, of course, like I mentioned before, the over-sexualization and kind of like the immature factor behind it, because there were like times where it was very theatrical, and obviously theatrical like in movies gives off that kind of like unbearable, immature tone, which I don't like in movies. So I don't think people would have resonated with that.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. Like it felt like a lot of the comedy was over the top in this, and actually just kind of like to go back to what Daniel was saying, is like a point I wanted to bring up was that, you know, it's like I haven't seen Airplane, but it seems like it struck the balance well in terms of it just being a good comedy first, and then applying the additional kind of bonus of, if you've seen this, like it adds another layer to it. And I feel like this is probably what was missing in a lot of this was. And I kind of hate to be too harsh on it, because it's a product of its time. It's a product of the 2000s, and what like society was like. I'm sure, like, you know, it was all the way at the time, but it just seems like a lot of the jokes and a lot of the theatrics behind it just aren't as great, or hasn't stood up the test of time. And for that reason, even like scenes where I did get the reference, I wasn't kind of like dying laughing, or I wasn't really laughing that much. And it was even like you mentioned, that scene of like, you know, something that had like no reference at all, like, you know, him smoking the weed from his lungs after he'd been shot. It was like stuff like that where it was like actually a little bit more creative and a little more a little bit more interesting. And I don't know whether like the WhatsApp was like sort of birthed here, because I do remember it.
I think that was a commercial in like '98 or something.
I think so. I was trying to remember if it was like a commercial first, or whether it was
I don't remember. There was a commercial. I don't remember if the commercial came first and this is spoofing it, or if this is just stoners doing stoner things, and so somebody made a commercial that referenced that. I don't remember. I'll find out in the edit. I think there are a couple of jokes here that just work on their own. Like I just like this whole thing, like the thing about the bullet wound and there's smoke coming out of his lung. I think that's just funny on its own. But then there's things like Mrs. Mann, right? Like the gym teacher. And it's like,
didn't.
So here's the thing, right? I actually defend like edgy and what gets described as offensive humor a lot, because I think a lot of the time it actually makes fun of the stereotype, right? Where it's only funny if you don't buy into the stereotype. But here, like, it's only funny if you think a man who looks like a woman is funny. Like, that's the punchline, right? And if you don't find that funny by itself, like, what else is funny about that scene?
No, she's not funny. For me, she was just the shock value of it. Because I actually forgot all about her and then when I saw the scene, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that's literally the reaction that I think most people will have. I don't think they should find that scene funny. I don't think that's what it's
Well, 2,000 people did.
Oh, well then 2,000 people.
2,000 was hilarious.
Is it the whole play on, like, I don't know, the whole, like, maybe like creepy gym like teacher or something like that, or like having like a male kind of like person into, you know, like a woman's team or whatever like that, and kind of the coercion that comes with, you know, with or the manipulation or whatever that comes with that position? Is that like the implication of it kind of meant to be what's funny in that as well?
So I think it's 50% the stereotype that gym teachers are a bit on the masculine side, and 50% trans people are funny. I think those are the two things that are going on there, and both of these things are not funny, right? Like there is, like, what's the punchline? Like, what's the funny part about this? And I'm not above like making jokes about just about any topic, but there has to be a joke. It can't just be laughing at somebody. There has to be some kind of wit, or like jokes have an actual structure, right? And when you're making fun of people or a group of people, often it's just, let's laugh at the group that can't fight back. But in other cases, there's an actual joke there, and it plays with a stereotype, or it makes fun of the prejudice itself or whatever, right? And here it's just the idea that there's a gym teacher who looks like a man, or is a man dressed in women's clothing, and she's inappropriate with the female students. That's the entire thing. That is one of those things that has, like, I think when people talk about what's not aged well in this, it's that.
My question in that is, how different is that joke compared to the female teacher that had to pay me by one of the students and was, you know, kind of like saying that like one of the other like male students was next or whatever? I don't feel like in that one there was like a huge.
Who's being attacked in that case?
But I don't feel like. Well, I didn't see it as like the gym teacher was being attacked, to be honest.
We're laughing at that group of people in that scene, don't we? Whereas with the inappropriate teacher, I think the whole thing is like she's talking about, like the punchline is, she's talking about, I think, I have to look it up now, but like something about ethics or morality or something. And then she's the most unethical person you've ever seen. That's the joke. And you're not making fun of a group, you're making fun of like this person who is this massive hypocrite. That's what you're laughing at, right? And that she like behaves in an inappropriate way so blatantly. That's the funny part, right? And I don't feel like we are like attacking a group in this.
I need to rewatch that scene of the gym teacher, because like initially watching it, I didn't like see the issue, but obviously again I'm like not even like the target group of the joke as well, so you know I can't, you know, take or like not take offense on their behalf essentially, but I might give that a rewatch just to kind of understand the context. Because again, I didn't blatantly see it like as an outright attack when viewing it.
So I think there's a few clues here. One of them is that was just funny in 2000. Just about any comedy in that time went to that well. And second of all, there's an absence of a punchline otherwise. If you don't share that frame of reference and its perspective, then that scene is not funny. Or like there's nothing, like they're not trying to be funny in any other way. And I kind of bring this up because a lot of people would say you can't make a movie like this today. And I think there's a few different ways in which that is the case. But one of the ways is that there's like a few of these, like with Doofy, we were mostly just laughing at the fact that he has a mental handicap. And like there's a little bit more to it, like when in the end it turns out that the whole thing is an act. And so he put on that act in order to be ignored and underestimated. With Doofy, like 95% of the time, we're just laughing at the fact that he has that condition. And so I don't want to moralize about this, right? I'm not going to call out or cancel a scary movie or something like that. I'm just looking at this and saying, is this funny and am I enjoying watching this? And I think it would have been a little bit uncomfortable. Like at 14, I wouldn't have found it all that unusual, especially if every other movie you're watching is like this. But I think I remember like rewatching it at like 25 or something like that, and still saying, "Well, what's the joke here? Why are we doing this?" I think there's enough stuff like this in the movie, in between the actual funny jokes, that it kind of makes the whole thing kind of not fun, at least for me. And it's kind of weird, like, because it's not just one or two jokes that, like, in a comedy like this, there's gonna be a few jokes that you don't like, and you kind of move on, and 30 seconds later there's another one and you might like that one, right? But here it's kind of sprinkled throughout the entire movie very consistently. Mrs. Mann is just one character in a one-off scene, but Doofy is throughout the movie, right? And gets a lot of screen time. And if you don't find that funny, then that's half the movie. Yeah. I think that is basically the part that has not aged well, right? And I think in between there's some actual quality jokes, but it's more like there's a lot like this. It's like the percentage of it is just too high for me to just sit back and enjoy watching the movie. Kind of have to kind of navigate the parts that aren't funny, and then occasionally there's something that is funny.
That's quite interesting, man. Because I'm like, I kind of actually lean more towards what Jonathan was saying, is that the part that I wasn't enjoying was the overly sexual jokes that were kind of like coming off in this movie, and it felt like every other joke was a sex joke. And I was like, I mean, can we not find anything else that's like marginally funny, or like find some like another topic to kind of like laugh about or sort of make fun of? But again, it kind of fits in with the period of time it was. I remember watching like things like WWE, and that was like hypersexualized at the time. That was like what was going on during that era, but it kind of like fits in within the time, you know, of like American Pie and stuff like that. So like, I give it grace, but for me, that was like the part where had aged more poorly. And I understand like kind of like the jokes about like Dewey and stuff like that. I actually feel like that was maybe too much as well, kind of riffing on his mental illness. But yeah, like it just seemed like there was just like one too many sexual jokes in this movie. And I was like, okay, like I'm kind of like bored of it, and I felt like I was like maybe too old for it as well.
I think they are mixed bag. I think some of them work and some are just very rote and just not very creative. And then there are others that work better, and because that is more mixed bag, I'm more okay with it. But yeah, a lot of them are just filler, right? Where they just put in stuff that I kind of will get a safe laugh, but that don't require any kind of creativity. And like at this point, I've just seen better spoof movies that are more creative and more intelligent, but all often in a very, like, you can be very crude in a very smart way, where you still go to the same well, but you are more like, when if we do Airplane in a couple of weeks, there are some jokes in that are similar, but they're just vastly more well crafted. And like with this movie, it just comes down to a lot of this. Like they have some good lines in here. One joke that I thought worked was the after credit scene, where Shorty is parodying this video that the guy from Scream makes, like the guy who gets killed, and so he makes a video about how sequels work. Remember that? And then like in the end, then it turns out he's talking into a convenience store security camera, and he's about to rob the place with his friends. That was funny.
Yeah.
Like now that I'm explaining it, maybe not so much, but like it references a thing that you know if you've seen Scream, and then it subverts your expectations because it's something much dumber than the original, and like that's a joke. Right? You can like that, you cannot like it, but it's a joke, right? And that is different. Or like there's a scene where in the big reveal, where the two villains kind of reveal themselves to Cindy. They have the voice changer, right? And it briefly malfunctions, and that makes fun of the magic voice changer from Scream 3. It's a very quick joke. Like it briefly malfunctions instead of the ghost face. It's the voice from one of her friends, and that's just a very brief reference to Scream 3. Or when like there's throughout the movie there's this gay panic joke where is it Ray?
Yeah.
Was constantly afraid that he comes across as gay. And this is a joke that movies from the early 2000s also made constantly. And then they make this joke where he's in the dorm room with Brenda, with his girlfriend, right? And she's wearing the football jersey.
Oh yeah.
And she just keeps putting on the football gear because that's what gets him interested. When the more she looks like a football player, That was a fun joke.
The whole like combination of all the like gay jokes that's sprinkled in between some of the movie, which leads to who's the other guy when he's like doing the big reveal and he's like, oh, I've got like one big secret. It's like me and Ray are gay, and he's like, what? It's like, okay.
Yeah, that's what I was building up to, right? That's Bobby, I think, right? Where it turns out he's not gay, but everybody thinks he's gay.
Yeah.
But then they keep doing these things, like going on a vacation to San Francisco together, and like they at least had fun with the cliche, right? So there's this cliche in early 2000s comedies that somebody is really afraid of coming across as gay, and then they keep building on that joke and keep exaggerating it throughout the movie, and then it pays off in the end, where everybody thinks he's gay, but he's not. But they keep doing extremely stereotypically gay things together. I thought that was funny. Like when you explain it like this, it's not like the most hilarious thing, but like that is like a progression throughout the movie where it keeps like they take something that is familiar to the audience, and normally the audience would kind of just laugh along with and not think about it, but then keep building on it, and they even subvert it in the end. And then they subvert the subversion, right? So the movie has stuff like this too. So it's this massive grab bag of everything from pretty clever jokes to niche references to just the laziest stereotypes you've ever seen, when it's all in the same movie. And I think that is part of why this movie has this weird reputation where everybody can kind of project what they want onto it, right? If you want to be outraged at how awful the early 2000s were, you can find examples of it. And if you want just carefree fun, and everybody else is just being a spoilsport and is just being a downer, then you can also find examples of this in this movie, right? So it's this really weird mix. Like, it's not all cut from the same cloth, I don't think.
No. And I was going to say as well, it has a bit of everything for everyone. And I was going to ask, was American Pie came out before this, right?
I believe that was 98.
Yeah.
Like late 90s, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously American Pie worked. It was such a big hit. So I felt like Scary Movie was so clever because, like you said, it had a bit of everything. Where it had the fun jokes, it had the stereotypical stuff, it had the references. So it had a bit of everything that everyone would like, which is why it was such a big success back in the day. And obviously that's why you kind of answer the question of why it was so over sexualized. Obviously that was a reflection of that day, but the way that the movie industry works, they see something that works and then they'll build off it. So obviously American Pie was such a big success. Why? Mainly because obviously it's sexual exploitation. So they said, okay, let's make sure we have a bunch of that in there because we know for a fact that was so successful with a mixture of obviously with the whole Scary Movie references and just the kind of like parody of just like horror films in the 90s. So
yeah, and then this one was really successful. It made like almost $300 million on a $19 million budget. So they made 20 more, and like 3 of them are good. Right, that's the whole thing of if Hollywood finds something that works, they run it into the ground.
Yeah.
Right, and I honestly think that this is kind of the beginning of the end of comedy, because wherever on the balance you fall, it's at least a successful comedy that a lot of people enjoyed, right? And then it kicks off this decade-long string of imitators where they keep running the same joke into the ground and it gets lazier and lazier with each implementation. And there's like a handful of ones that are actually any good. Like I rewatched Not Another Teen Movie just a few months ago, and that holds up. That's I think much cleverer than this, about satirizing like teen comedies. The vast majority of them are extremely lazy and just gave comedy a bad name. And like I think taught an entire generation that comedy is just not funny. Maybe like I wouldn't. It maybe goes too far to blame it entirely on this. Like not Scary Movie 1 specifically, but all the sequels and imitators. And I don't know that comedy has really comedy seems to have moved into like niches, but there's like not much mainstream comedy anymore, right? And I think there's a few different contributing factors. One of them is that people don't go to the cinema for them anymore, so they don't really get made. And then you've got the fact that like things like superhero movies all became comedies. So the action comedy were action movies first, and then with some jokes in. So having a movie that's just jokes is kind of redundant. And then comedy mostly moved into like edgy comedy, like stuff like Rick and Morty and stuff like that, where mainstream audiences are put off by how crass it is. So it seems like this was kind of like the death rattle of comedy, maybe in some ways. Like I wouldn't blame it all on this movie, but it's like part of that progression.
You could also argue that it gave birth to like other things. Like I said, The Boys could be one, because I don't know.
I would describe The Boys more as a reaction to things like Game of Thrones, where I don't think The Boys is funny exactly, but it is a reaction to things like Game of Thrones. I think that really made that mainstream, Like the gritty drama, and the more cynical and more crude you make it, the more sophisticated people think it is. And I think I would describe it as being linked to that.
I meant in terms of making it more acceptable. Even though Scary Movie, if you were to drop Scary Movie now, I think it would totally get cancelled. I don't think they'll allow it. However, it did. I'm saying like it paid, like it allowed content like The Boys to be dropped, because The Boys, there's like a thin line with The Boys, even though it is very like it is OD as well, like over sexualized, but it's not as over sexualized.
Well, I mean, so I think the Scary Movie is very middle of the road for early 2000s comedies. I don't think it broke any ground or pushed any envelopes. It kind of just did what everybody else was doing, and it just was very successful at that. And like Game of Thrones is kind of at the tail end of, like, HBO did that for well over a decade, right? Where it was all very heavy on nudity and things like that. And like if you watch like pretty much any HBO show predating Game of Thrones, they're all like this. And then kind of Game of Thrones kind of extended a couple of years into the era where that became not acceptable anymore. And so like House of the Dragon, for instance, is very different already. I think, yeah, these edgy, mature, cynical dramas, I think, follow in the Game of Thrones tradition much more than this. So speaking of that, they're making another Scary Movie, and it's scheduled for 2026.
What, seriously?
Yeah, it's being made.
That's going to be terrible.
I would say what I will say is that because I know you said a lot of the sequels didn't have the same sort of kind of like appeal as maybe like the first two. It was, and discussed by like kind of like Marlon Wayans, is that they had kind of like ownership over the first two, and then the studios kind of wrestled the franchise away from them, and they weren't able to sort of be directly involved in some of the sequels that came afterwards. So potentially that's like positive signs in terms of like it's kind of going back to sort of its original creators, the ones that sort of kind of birthed 1 and 2. But I am kind of also concerned in that, trying to recapture the magic of the past, trying to, again, like going back to sort of an old franchise, trying to kind of like feed on nostalgia, and like it's going to be interesting how they adapt it to, kind of like modern day society, like what kind of like jokes are they sort of looking to make, what parts of sort of like society or like, some of the norms of like, TV or movie culture are they going to try and, potentially riff off. So it's a risk. And like Scary Movie is a franchise where I feel like, again, we talked about like a lot of the comedy and a lot of the jokes in this, and like how some hit, some didn't. But I feel like if you asked anyone that hadn't seen it in a long time, they probably had a positive sort of kind of like experience with it, or they have like somewhat, a particular scene or a particular sort of kind of like joke that like landed really well for them. Like for me, I think it's in Scary Movie 2 where it's the guy with like the broken hand or like the messed up hand, and he's like, take my strong hand. I don't know why, but as kids we found that like particular joke hilarious, and we like used to kind of like always like riff on that one for whatever reason. But I feel like the franchise has potential, but there's like pros and cons as to sort of them remaking it and bringing it back, I'd say.
Yeah, I think there's just a few question marks. Like, where are the Wayans at now? Do they have the same sense of humor that they had 25 years ago? If not, what is it? And if it is the same sense of humor, does that still have an audience? And will a studio invest tens of millions of dollars into a movie that will, at minimum, be controversial if it's the same kind of thing? There's just like all sorts of questions I have about, or more like I'm not necessarily looking forward to watching the movie, but I'm kind of just curious what it turns out to be and how it gets received and what kind of audience it attracts.
Yeah, and I am curious as well. And I think there's 3 reasons. I hope they do take time with it in terms of like they're like gonna invest in trying to be smart with the jokes. And the reason why, I have 3 reasons why I don't think it's gonna work. First reason is because there's just too many restrictions, like in terms of like censorship. Like you can't do the same things that you did back in the day. Second reason, a lot of the reboots that have come out have been like watered down due to obviously like the censorship. Like a lot of the times back in the day, you allowed freedom to pretty much take the piss out of whoever, right? But now you can't. You're not going to get away with that. Third reason, Coming to America 2 was a perfect example of why you should just leave the old with the old. I remember when Coming to America 2 came out, like, because Coming to America 1 was obviously, it was very notable for like obviously the jokes that they were making, and you could tell like it was of its time. But Coming to America 2, they tried to make like it was a reflection of this time. It was of the times that we're living in now, and it just didn't mesh well. Like it was just bad. It was watered down. It was terrible. That's why I feel like series movie six is going to be so hard unless they're like you say, they have to be kind of like smart with their jokes. Unless they invest in the script and they actually like take time to actually, of course the joke's gonna be offensive, but it has to like there's going to be rules now. They're going to have, because before they didn't really have that much rules, but now they're going to have a lot of rules they're going to have to abide by, as well as making it smart, as well as it having like the same identity that Scary Movie had, which was the like, the crudeness, the maybe not the over sexualization, but do you know what I'm saying? So with this one, there's going to be a lot of obstacles they're going to have to try to overcome to make this such a successful movie, but I don't see it because a lot of the reboots have just been lazy when it comes to the script writing. They've just relied heavily on nostalgia, and when you rely heavily on nostalgia, it's a flipping boring script. It's a boring script. So this one,
it'll be a sense of like anyone that's like maybe like nostalgic for Scary Movie 1 or Scary Movie 2 and probably hadn't seen it in a long time and maybe stumble upon the new movie. There's going to be, again, potentially that like there's the potential risk of like that sense of disappointment of it not being as edgy or it not kind of like living up to what you remember sort of Scary Movie being, at the time of sort of watching it as well. If it's not if it's not going to go to some of the length, if it's not going to kind of like push the boat on on comedy, then you're kind of like running a really big risk as well of just like people just like feeling underwhelmed by by the movie.
Yeah, and like I've got kind of two big thoughts on that. One of them is that, like you say, legacy sequels have a very poor track record, right? The vast majority of them they either come across as really tired and exhausted, or they just don't have an audience anymore, right? Like we had this with The Crow last year. This is a story that's very rooted in 90s culture. And just doing a story about a goth kid that becomes like an angel of vengeance in like 2024 does not resonate with anybody, right? Because it does not tap into youth culture as it actually exists at that point, right? So you either keep it the way it is, and in which case it barely resonates with anybody, or you update it to keep kind of the core of it. But then your established audience says, I don't recognize this, right? So that I think that is a massive challenge. So if you just make another scary movie the way you did it 25 years ago, you will kind of run into that challenge, right? This is kind of my thing. And then the other aspect of that is that there actually are still plenty of edgy comedies, but they tend to be not as mainstream, and they tend to be fairly intelligent. And they also tend to laugh at themselves, right? So one example of this is Rick and Morty, right? Very smart show, just in terms of the stories that are being told and how it's constructed and whatever. Or like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia has been running for 87 seasons. And that one is funny because the main characters are the bad guys, right? Like the show is laughing at the main characters. And so when they are bigots or idiots or awful people or whatever, we're laughing at them. We're not laughing at their victims. And I don't know that a scary movie would be made where that is the case, where the Wayans are laughing at themselves. I don't know. I've not seen that many of their movies, and I don't know like how they've evolved over the last 25 years. If you have, like is that possible?
I think so. I mean, you've got like, I don't know if you've seen things like White Chicks and stuff like that, where kind of.
But White Chicks is like 2005 or something. That's not a recent movie.
No, yeah, not a recent movie. I think, and I haven't watched them. The most recent ones that they've done is like A Haunted Mansion, and I don't know how well that was received actually.
My question is just, usually you get away with edgy humor by laughing at yourself or making yourself the villain, and I don't see that happening here. So if they just keep doing what they did in older scary movies, I don't see that going well. Like even if they like really back off from specific topics or whatever, just the spirit of it, I don't know, lands that well, because you kind of have to either go very niche or you have to go like self-deprecating. I think those are the ways under which you can make like edgy, crass comedy at this point. Which is not the worst place this could be at, right? But it's just not what this is.
His most recent film was A Haunted Mansion 2, 2014. And IMDb rating 4.7. The reviews are mixed. And looking at the review, some comment says, I think there's a comment that you say he has sex with a doll. So, he might still have like the edgy edge, the edginess that Scary Movie had. Like he might, because I swear he's a comedian. Is he a comedian? Because if he's a comedian, because a lot of these comedians, they're kind of like against cancel culture. So he might just be like, what, F it, let me just go against the grain and do what I know how to do best.
Yeah, maybe, but then the question is like, would a studio allow that to happen, and can it actually succeed? And that would be my big question.
It'll be smart to go straight to streaming. Like, I don't see
Maybe.
if it's a thing where it is like crude, like scary movie, then it would make sense. I don't think they'd allow. I don't think they'd drop it, or they would wanna. Yeah, I don't think they'd drop it. If it was streaming, on the other hand, I see a couple of streaming services taking that risk, especially Prime, especially Amazon.
Yeah, Netflix did that for a while and didn't really work out for them. I'm just saying, like whichever way you slice it, it's kind of difficult, right? Like if you update it in some way, like I've seen people say, or there's like an entirely new generation of horror movies that can be lampooned, like if they took the piss out of like elevated horror, but then that sounds a whole lot smarter than what they've been doing in Scary Movie, right? Because in Scary Movie, it's not really about the movies. Like the movies are like the framework, but then the jokes themselves are just stoner humor.
But do they have to follow the same system that they've done all this whole time? Can't they like change it up? Like,
sure, they can change it, but if they change it, that's a risk.
I can't see them following the old system and being successful. It could be successful, but there's going to be a lot of outrage behind it. I could just tell.
Yeah. Or it's so careful and so managed that it stops being funny because they just won't take any chances at all. Right? So however, whichever way you slice it, it's weird. Like, why would you do, like, why pick that? Why not revive some other comedy that's maybe like the Police Academy movies have also not aged terribly well in a few different areas because of just how 80s comedies tended to be. But you can make I don't think those are ways that are essential to what's appealing about a Police Academy movie. So I think you can update that premise in a way that still works today. And I don't know, like with Scary Movie, that seems to be the entire point. Right? Like I don't see how you can update Scary Movie without turning it into something completely different.
The only maybe they could. It could be a thing which might be a bit smart to do. Maybe it could be a thing where the structure is they pretty much do things that, when you watch horror movie and then people like the audience will be like, why the hell would they do that? That's so stupid.
Isn't that just Scream?
Not really, because in Scream they're still making stupid decisions. Like, I mean, like, for example, when someone would do, I don't know, where someone would go in a room that's dark and they shouldn't be by themselves. But in Scary Movie 6, they see the dark room and like, you know what? Hold on. And then they go and grab like 5 guys and then they all go in. Like something like that. I can see that kind of being funny if they were smart with it.
Maybe, yeah. It's not like you can't do comedy anymore, right? It's more like it's unpredictable how it will land, like regardless of what they try, I think. So on that level, I'm just intrigued in terms of what actually happens. And I guess we'll find out like next year. It's just looking at this, like it's just so far removed from the zeitgeist. So I'm just not sure like what like how a Scary Movie would slot into that, right? Or what it would slot into in the first place. So again, but we'll see next year, I guess.
Oh crap! This is getting it's actually a theatrical release. It's being released with Miramax and Paramount.
Yeah.
Wow. So it looks like
it's not just a small like Netflix movie or something like that.
Yeah.
It seems to be made as a full scale theatrical release.
It's gonna be interesting. Like, I'm really intrigued to see what the hell they're gonna do with this. I just don't see them, making a traditional Scary Movie. I just see it being so watered down.
But then we also had Deadpool this year, where before Deadpool came out, I also kind of said like, surely Disney will not allow them to actually go anywhere. But then they kind of did a little bit. Like that one didn't hold back too many punches. So I think it's just we're currently in a place where we don't have a cultural consensus in terms of what's funny and what's allowed. Like where there are a few things where it's clear that it's not allowed, but we don't really have like a firm consensus on where the line actually is or what the rules actually are. And so every time you do something like this, you're kind of rolling the dice, it seems. And so just on that basis, I'm just curious where how those dice will land with a movie like this. So I think we've reached the end, unless we have something else to bring up. So any last words on Scary Movie?
I still had a fun experience with this one. But like I said, I already mentioned what my issues were with it. I'm like curious, because I didn't know there was going to be a Scary Movie 6. So I'm curious to see what, the new Scary Movie is. But in regards to this movie, I had a fun time. That's just about it. I had a fun time. I did have my issues, but all in all, overall, I had a fun time.
I had a good enough time with it. Nice kind of like nostalgic feels when reliving some of the jokes and kind of like cringing at other parts of it as well. It was like a nice like time capsule. It was like a nice like kind of like going back in time and kind of like re-experiencing kind of what things were like back in the days and sort of kind of like how the jokes were, and it kind of like just reminded me of like a few other things I'd watched at that time as well, which was nice. I kind of would say it's one worth checking out. Like if you haven't seen it, maybe like younger generation as well. I would say like it's an interesting enough kind of like movie, especially like if you're into like some of the classic horror movies that it is referencing. I think it's like definitely worth checking this out. Although it might ruin your experience of watching Scream again, because you'll see kind of like one scenes and then you'll just have like scary movie in your head anytime you're watching Scream. But yeah, no, good enough time and sort of one worth checking out if you've seen some of the other movies.
Yeah, I think for me, this is one of those where I'd rather watch a couple of scenes on YouTube as opposed to the entire movie. Because the entire movie is just too much of a mixed bag, just in terms of quality, in terms of actually being funny. But yeah, it was interesting to kind of go back and like the last time I saw this, I just had not seen most of the movies it references, and now I've seen most of them, and so that just gives a different perspective on this. But I feel like I'm done with it a little bit. It makes me want to watch something like Airplane or Top Secret again, or just Scream. Like it seems like there's just a whole bunch of better ways to do this kind of movie.
Thank you very much for tuning into today's episode.
If you liked what we did today, tell a friend. If you hated what we did, tell an enemy.
We will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Bye-bye.